Hi guys, Miss Francis here. Yesterday we looked at the types of cell communication. Today we're going to address the three stages of cell signaling or cell communication, where the first step is reception, then you've got transduction, and finally a response. In reception, some sort of chemical signal, which is also called the ligand, for example, a neurotransmitter, a hormone, is going to bind to a cellular protein, which is usually found at the surface of the cell. And what happens is some sort of conformational change in that receptor. This is called transduction. And what that brings about is some sort of cascade of reactions that involves or that brings about some sort of response. So here you see you've got your signal molecule binding to a receptor, leading to a conformational change and a cascade of reactions, which then activates some sort of cellular response. That response may be the making of a protein, such as an enzyme, or the making of a transcription factor, which may turn on or off a gene. So if we were to match the term with its description, if we looked through here, if you take some time to look through here, make sure you're able to match the term with the description. Here's an elaboration on receptor proteins and ligands. So here is your receptor protein, and you'll notice that your receptor protein has a specific shape, meaning ligands are specific to the receptor, where that ligand is just a small molecule that binds to that larger molecule being the receptor protein. That receptor protein then undergoes a conformational change, which starts transduction, which then can activate a receptor along with a cascade of reactions that will eventually lead to some sort of response. Now, why do signal receptors why are most signal receptors plasma membrane proteins? Well, because most of these signal molecules, most of these ligands need to bind to receptor proteins because they're hydrophilic and can't dissolve through the hydrophobic sections of the cell membrane, so they need the use of a protein in order to get into the cell. Which word doesn't belong? Receptor, because that's the molecule that all of the other words bind to. For example, ligand binds to a receptor. Neurotransmitter binds to a receptor. Signal molecule is a ligand, for example, a neurotransmitter. Here's an interesting case study. You had a person who invested a lot of money in a champion show dog, and that person wanted to breed their champion show dog, but the champion show dog was experiencing erectile dysfunction. So she reached out to her friend who was a doctor, and the doctor said, all right, let me send you an image of a pathway that represents how cells communicate that might be able to help solve the issue. So on the AP exam or on any exam, you might be asked to look at an image and be able to depict what's going on. So let's attack this image. Do you recognize that there are two boxes and each box is labeled as an endothelial cell or a smooth muscle cell? These smooth muscle cells are the muscle cells that are found inside of your blood vessels. If you were asked, where can I find the ligand? Would you be able to recognize that nitric oxide is the ligand because it's able to make it through to the second cell? Now, so let's label nitric oxide as our ligand, as our first messenger, and also address the fact that it's small and that it's nonpolar. Would you be able to recognize that cyclic GMP is a secondary messenger that's going to set off this cascade of reactions? And what does it mean that these arrows are increasing in size? What do you think that would imply? That implies amplification. And what ends up happening is the response. In this case, would you be able to recognize that relaxation is the response? When you're trying to get an erection, you do not want your blood vessels to relax. You want your blood vessels to be filled with blood so that they become erect. In the case of the show dog wasn't experiencing this relaxation. So there was some sort of miscommunication. In other words, somewhere in this pathway, something wasn't being received. Here's a sample FRQ that addresses the different steps involved in signaling pathways. So it says this figure below represents a generalized hormone signaling pathway. Explain the role of each numbered step in regulating target gene expression. And this is what you should be able to come up with. That step 1 represents reception, that you have a signal known as a ligand, for example, a hormone or neurotransmitters that binds to a receptor, causing a conformational change in the receptor, which leads to transduction and a cascade of reactions, which ultimately activates a response. In this case, the response was the turning on or off of a gene. That ends our discussion of the steps involved in cell communication. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about the 3 major types of signal receptors.